So today we're saying a sad farewell to our biggest fan. Because we got aircon! We should see around 14 volts, 14.4 volts. Ooh. And away we go. Hey guys, it's Cam here. Welcome back to the build room, and I am excited because in this week's episode, we are finally gonna get an engine into the engine bay of our 1976 RA28 Celica, affectionately known as Doofer. And we're gonna bring that bad boy back to life. So stick around and check it out. Okay, so in the last week's episode, we got the engine out of Doofer here, and we managed to get the entire engine bay and a significant portion of the underbody cleaned up, ready to go for today's episode. So today is another scorcher. I've got the shade cloth up already, and what we're gonna do today is hopefully get the new motor in, get it running, and then probably do some basic maintenance on it, because I guarantee you, that motor has not had any love for about the last decade or more. So let's get this bonnet off and see where we're at. All right, so this is our starting point for the day. If you remember in the last episode, we cleaned all the black paint off the engine bay. We did some rust converter to pull up some surface rust, and we clear coated some areas which we're gonna continue to rust. We've got a nice clean tunnel now. That's all looking spectacular. So the gearbox is good to go back in, and I can hook up the tail shaft and things like that. I'm not going to mess with these too much, because the bottom line is, I think, especially the tail shaft, it might need a new center bearing. I know the one on the Celica did, and if this is in the same sort of condition, we're definitely going to have to replace that, which means pulling the tail shaft at some stage. I don't have a bearing right now. It's going to take a while to come. So we're just going to make do with what we've got. We also fixed the battery area, which had obviously had some paint and probably a battery explosion at some point, and covered up these really ugly areas just with some black caliper paint, the same satin stuff that I've been using everywhere else, and we extended that to behind the headlights. So now we need to get the motor in. All right, so engine's in. I've got it jacked up properly again so I can get under it safely and do the tail shaft and everything. Yeah, it's looking pretty good. It's like it's at home, funnily enough. So let's get back under the car and sort those things out, and then we are gonna start bolting on things here and see if we can get this bad boy fired up. Gotta line up the key. All right, so we're looking pretty good up here in the engine bay now. I did go back and change the hardware on the engine mounts. I just realized that the stuff that I was putting on was just random galvanized junk. and it was 16mm, which was a weird size. So I put the original 14mm hardware back in. Now it's time to start looking at seeing if we can get this thing fired up. Now the order in which we do things is gonna matter here. Basically, I wanna make sure that I'm not blocking anything I'm trying to do as I put extra stuff in. So we're gonna start on this side of the engine. And the first thing I'm gonna do is I need to swap over these earth straps to the one that came on doofer. And if I was to say put the exhaust in first, I'm gonna then block my access to that, or at least make it harder to get to. So I'm gonna do this from the underside of the car. We're gonna swap out that first, and then we'll put the exhaust on. Now the exhaust obviously wasn't meant for this car, so there's no way it's gonna match up with the other piece of exhaust that's under there all the way to the rear. But the exhaust that we've got does have a hot dog resonator or hot dog muffler or something on it, so it's quiet enough for now just for moving the car around. We'll deal with a full exhaust later. So yeah, time to get back under the car. Whee! This little guy here is a radio noise suppressor. In there. Get the grounding strap for the rear of the head. So there, spring pops underneath. All right, we're good to go. One, three, 4, and 2. We are good as new. All right, so we've connected the starter, the ignition system, a few other bits and pieces in the ancillary. The only things we need now is a fuel system and a battery. Got our electric fuel pump. Okay. Right, and now for the big moment. The ignition does work. All right, let's see if we got some fuel. And away we go. All right, that fuel gauge there, this level, it is slowly filling up, so there's still some work to be done on that carb, but we should be able to have a red hot crack at getting this started now. And while I'm getting set up here, you guys might as well take a minute to like, subscribe, and hit that notification bell. Fire in the hole. All right. That's better. Okay, we just have to get that fuel through, I'd say. All right. All right, so I've just adjusted the idle screw slightly just to lift the idle a bit. I'm just gonna try to see if we can get it to idle properly, or at least close to properly. Fire in the hole. All right, I mean, that's not a perfect idle, but remember, we've only got half an exhaust. We don't have the air cleaner or anything on, which will change the mixture once you've got that restriction of the cleaner in place. And we don't have a water system or anything like that, so this is about as long as I'm gonna run it, otherwise I think it'll get too hot. All right, so with the idle turned up a bit, it was well and truly, yeah, we've got a couple of problems. Firstly, the carb is leaking fuel, which is not great, but I would say that needs a full kit in it, so I'm not going to let it slow me down for now. What I do want to check though are two things. Firstly, I want to make sure the alternator's working, so I'm going to have to throw the multimeter onto the battery and check it when it's running. Hopefully it will run long enough to make that check. And then the second one is I want to start sorting out a cooling system so that I can run this for long enough to A, clean everything out of the engine, and B, also get some heat into the oil, and I'll drop the oil and do an oil change. So we'll start with checking the alternator through the battery. We just need the multimeter, switch that to voltage, and then provided, well, this battery's just been charged, so we should have 12 point something-ish volts here at the battery, 12.65. That means the battery's good. Now, when we start the car and the alternator's charging and the regulator's working correctly, we should see around 14 volts, 14.4 volts from that. So yeah, let's see if we can get this started up, and then what I'll do is I'll put the camera on the tripod so you can see this. All right, we had 14 there, so I'm pretty happy with that. All right, so that's cool. I wasn't expecting that. I mean, the alternator is looking like it's seen better days, and I did pressure wash that a lot, but it seems to have held up, which is good. So now for the cooling system. So I'm not gonna set this up permanently, mainly because I'm about to run a whole bunch of stuff through here that will flush the engine out and also flush the radiator and everything. So I don't wanna start running through this and putting a whole bunch of replacement parts in it, because then I'm going to run all that crap water through them and ruin all that new stuff. So I'm just going to pop a radiator in that I have that's a spare. This one is, again, looking a little worse for wear. In fact, down the bottom here, I had to actually weld this up. I had to MIG it up, but again, it's a doofer. I'm hoping this is going to seal, but if it does spring a leak, I won't exactly be surprised. Now, while that's out, I'm going to get the bottom hose on. The bottom hose goes in here, so it's just going to be much easier to attach it while I've got the radiator out of the way. So we'll get that hose attached on, we'll get the radiator in, and then we'll get the top hose in. And I'm actually also going to take the thermostat out of here. Now, I would never normally recommend taking a thermostat out. You should always run one. It helps your engine heat up quickly and get to temperature, and that's what you want to do to minimize the wear on the engine. But for this purpose, I want as much coolant running through the motor to flush it out as possible, and I'll deal with the wear on this one startup. But as soon as we've confirmed that everything's okay, you know, for all I know, I could put water in this thing and it could just start puking water into the cylinders. It could have a bad head gasket, and without water in it, we wouldn't know. So yeah, once I've confirmed that this thing is ship shape, then we'll get a good cooling system in place, because in WA, you cannot afford to not have a decent cooling system in place for any engine. It is about 44 degrees outside at the moment here, which is well over the 100 Fahrenheit. So yeah, that's pretty common over here, and you need a decent cooling system to hold up to it. The other thing I have to contend with on this one is, if you look in here, the water pump housing has actually rusted through. See this pipe here? That is rusty on the end, and if I go around the other side, it's obviously got a leak at some point, and someone's just put a screw in it to stop that leak. So yeah, this is all garbage. So it's going to need a new housing at some point, but for now, all I'm going to do is cut that off about there, and then I'm going to bridge these hoses from here to here. So normally this is a bridge between the two, and these two run out to the heater core. We don't need the heater core at the moment, so I'll bridge that, which will make this bridging superfluous. So I can cut behind that metal bar there, lop that off, connect these two up, and then just block this one off. You notice here as well, this thing's missing the water temp sensor. So what I'm going to use is the multimeter, because I have a temperature probe on this one. And that'll tell me at least what the temperature will be in the radiator. So yeah, we'll get the camera set up and we'll get a cooling system in and then see how we go. All right, so we have a radiator, all the lines are in, everything's blocked off. Took out the thermostat, threw in a dodgy old gasket that I had laying around, so that should seal enough for what we're trying to do here. We've got a bypass in place. It does kink. I should have put more hose on it, but look, it's not the end of the world. All I'm really worried about is I've got enough water in the engine for it not to overheat while I'm trying to, you know, test and tune it and things like that. I've also put the pyrometer into the radiator and it is already registering a balmy 31 degrees. The engine has not been on. This is water straight out of the tap. Yeah, WA life. So we'll see if this is accurate and how much it increases by. The one thing you also will have seen me do was vacuum out this area of the head. When I popped the thermostat top cover off, there was firstly a whole bunch of rubber that had been caught up, and that's usually from a hose perishing and just letting rubber in, and then it tries to get pulled through the thermostat. So that would have been blocking the thermostat for starters, but also underneath it was just so much rust. It was absolutely horrible. So I actually got the vacuum in there and vacuumed it out, which, you know, it's got a significant amount of dirt out, but I would imagine there's still more in the engine, which is why we're doing this process, because I don't care if I ruin this radiator. I don't care if I ruin that water pump. There is no thermostat to ruin. So really, other than moving dirt around the engine, which we can't avoid, there's no way to deal with that crap in the engine without actually running something through it. So it is what it is. We're just gonna see if it's gonna work now. So I'm gonna fire it up. We'll let it run for a little while. We'll see if we can get the temperature into it. I mean, seeing this sit around 60 or 70 degrees, or at least get to that point, would be nice. I did also tighten up these two nuts on the carb and sprayed some cleaner on it so we can see if it still continues to leak fuel. Anyway, let's quit with the jibber jabber, fire it up and just see what happens. All right, so we already put a little bit of heat into it, 36 already, and water is rushing past this at a high rate of knots, which is a good sign, meaning the water pump's going. Doesn't seem to be any leaks at the moment. I mean, I haven't put a cap on this, which means it's not under pressure yet, but yeah, I'm gonna run it for a little bit longer. I'll show you guys the water movement and we'll see if that temperature goes up. All right, so you can see the water rushing past there, I hope. Moving through the top of the tank really, really quickly. No thermostat will do that. And we're seeing the temperature go up here, 41. Just gonna leave it running for a little while, see where we can get it. I'll come back in a sec. All right, so that ran pretty well. We got it up to about 70 degrees in the water, which is pretty good. Heaps and heaps of water movement, and I've put some radiator flush in there now to run through the motor. We do have a leak from the water pump, which is to be expected. You know, we've run this thing a fair amount with no water in it, and when you run a water pump with no water, you put an incredible amount of stress on all the seals. You have a habit of chewing them out, so I'm not surprised that that's happened, but I knew I had to replace the housing, which meant I was replacing the water pump and so on and so forth. So I'm fine with that. I've just turned it off for now though for two things. I want to drop the oil, get some new oil in that. Again, it won't be the final oil. This will be just basically a cleaning oil. And then if this motor is good, we will change it again, but I'll do the filter and the oil now. And I also don't want to run it too long without any fuel running through the fuel pump either. Because again, like the water pump, you're going to end up damaging it. So let's get under now, do the oil change. And then what I think I'll do is I will run some fuel through the fuel pump with the motor running and the new oil in it, and we'll see if it still pumps or whether it's buggered too, and then we might call it a day. All right, so I've raised the tank, I've blocked off the line. We're gonna run it for about 30 seconds now and see how much fuel we get pumping into the other side. So let's try it out. Get it started. Right, so I think that went pretty well. Definitely got a working fuel pump. I don't know what the flow rate is supposed to be, so I can't actually measure it, but it is putting fuel in. This thing doesn't exactly gobble fuel, so that should be more than enough. I mean, that's sort of, I'd say 600 mil in the space of 30 seconds. Now, that carb ain't going through that much fuel that quickly. So it's all good. What I'm gonna do now is hook up the fuel lines so that we actually start drawing from the yellow jerry can through the pump and into the carb from now onwards, and we won't need that electric pump anymore. But there's no need to run you guys through that. Let's jump back to the workbench and talk about what we're going to do in the next episode. All right, so that was an absolute monster of a day. It is blistering outside and it absolutely sucked to be out in that sort of weather, but I am stoked with how much work we got done. Great to hear that thing fire up again, even though we knew it was a viable engine to start with, but it's now in its forever home, and all we've got to do is make it nicer to deal with on a day-to-day basis. There is a bunch of other things that are going to need to be done to that car though. So obviously we saw the water pump was leaking from the weep hole. I'll explain the importance of that in next week's episode. We've also got to look at some of the other fluids. So that gearbox fluid had a lot of water in it. So I want to make sure that we drain that and get some new fluid in. That would have just been from sitting in the Celica with the big hole in the roof and a dodgy boot on the top of the gearbox. It would have just let a little bit of water in, and that was probably the first thing that came out because the oil would have been floating on top of it. So yeah, we're gonna get that sorted. I have to make sure that we've got a viable braking system on that thing. I am gonna need brakes to move it around the property, so that's gotta be done. We'll also solve the mystery of whether they are stock brakes or something a little bit more spicy. And yeah, and then we'll probably just work on getting a lot of the stuff that we took off, like the headlights and everything, all back on and have it good to go. All that installed for next week's episode. In between now and then, I'm gonna keep organizing the garage. If you'll see behind me, I am super excited because we have aircon in the build room, which is going to make my life much, much easier in here. It is very difficult to get motivation to go into the garage when it's sort of 55 degrees Celsius in here because it's 45 outside and this thing heat soaks like a mofo. So yeah, I'm super stoked on that one. It's going to raise the level of comfort in here significantly. But yeah, that means we are done for the day. So if you liked the episode, don't forget to like, subscribe, hit the notification bell and comment below as per usual. And I'm going to put up a bunch of content here about Violet Crumbles and our other builds so that you can watch that if you haven't already. Other than that, I just want to say thanks for watching and I'll see you next time on the Build Room. Bye for now.